The story begins with an enemy dashing forward, executing a flawless stab with his sword aimed at the protagonist, Incrid. It is the tip of the blade he has seen 17 times before. Incrid closes his eyes and experiences his 17th death. He wonders, if he had wielded his sword with just a bit more effort, if he had trained a little harder, perhaps he wouldn't have met his end here. In the depths of darkness, a mysterious creature, perched on a boat and holding a lamp, questions him. Does he truly believe that? The creature urges him to struggle, to experience it fully, and then to surrender, to embrace the despair of facing an insurmountable wall. Yet, instead of yielding, Incrid's expression twists with frustration, unwilling to accept defeat. One morning, the sound of pans and ladles clanging echoed through the air, jolting Incrid and the others awake. Among them, a long-haired man named Rem, who was in the middle of putting on his boots, took notice. Incrid, their squad commander, had woken up immediately today. Without hesitation, Incrid casually remarked that there were bugs in Rem's boots. Startled, Rem quickly checked, shaking his boots until a bug tumbled out. Without a second thought, someone crushed it underfoot. Turning to Incrid, Rem narrowed his eyes and demanded to know if he had put the bug there, calling it a ridiculous prank. But Incrid simply shrugged and replied that he had only seen it crawl in earlier. This was the 18th time Incrid had seen that bug's corpse. He wondered, if he saw it a few more times, would he finally reach the end of this day? Incrid had wielded a sword since childhood. He had learned swordsmanship from a retired mercenary who had wandered into his village by chance. The mercenary, impressed by his skill, had praised him, saying that if he was already this talented, he could one day become a knight. And so, he began to dream. He envisioned himself as a knight, one who could cut down 1,000 enemies single-handedly, someone capable of shifting the tide of battle, an invincible hero. He believed he was the protagonist of the ballad sung by a wandering minstrel. A group of mercenaries laughed, raising their beers as they recalled the rookie's fall earlier. They mocked the coward who had once trembled before a mere stray dog yet dared to dream of becoming a knight. To them, he wasn't even fit to be a wandering mercenary. Incrid, who had left his village to join a mercenary corps, soon realized that his so-called talent might not be anything special. But he believed it was far too soon to give up after a single failure. Hard work, after all, never betrays those who persevere. If he wasn't naturally gifted, then with time and effort, he was certain he could overcome his shortcomings. And for a while, it seemed true. He gained experience. He built the strength and endurance to earn the acknowledgement of those around him. But that hope began to crumble. In the village where he was stationed, a child challenged him to a duel. The boy was only 12 years old and had been training with a sword for just 6 months. Yet, despite all the years Incrid had spent wielding a blade, despite the calloused, wrecked hands that bore testament to his dedication, he found himself utterly outclassed. A fool who had devoted over a decade to the sword was still nothing compared to a genius in just 6 months. He wanted to become a knight. Everyone mocked him, calling it a hopeless dream. But he refused to give up. By sacrificing sleep, cutting down on meals, and dedicating every spare moment to swinging his sword, again and again, he believed that even if he could never become a knight, at the very least, he could become an experienced soldier. 3 years later. The present. The Cyprus Division, 4 companies, each with 4 platoons, each platoon divided into 4 squads. Through relentless effort, Incrid had climbed his way up to become the squad commander of a so-called second-rate squad. It was the highest position he could reach after years of endless training. Still, being a regular soldier of the kingdom was better than wandering as a mercenary. Incrid called Jackson, one of his squad members, and ordered him to take over his morning duty rotation for the day. Without complaint, Jackson agreed, telling Incrid to repay him next time before standing up to carry out the task. Noticing the way Jackson stared at Incrid, Rem labeled him a wicked, wild, cat-like bastard. When Incrid called Rem's name, Rem immediately questioned whether he was about to be assigned a task as well. Instead, Incrid mentioned Heart of the Beast and shared his desire to learn it again. Rem smiled and reminded him that he had given up on mastering it last time, then asked if he truly believed it would work now. The close combat battle between Naulilia and Aspen began once more. Incrid died in this battle, only to come back to life, reliving the same day over and over again. Each time he returned, he learned Heart of the Beast from Rem. Yet, no matter how many times he trained, he still couldn't see the tip of the sword that stabbed him. This was his 21st time on this battlefield. He had completely memorized every repeating event. The spear coming from behind, dodge it. Next, an attack from the enemy at his back, counter it. And then, Vel, one of his squad members, died. But this time, knowing what would happen, Incrid changed Vel's fate, blocking the incoming arrow. However, Vel lost focus, allowing an enemy to leap at him, sword poised to strike. Luckily, he was saved again. It worked. Even though Incrid managed to block the first arrow, he was immediately killed afterward, but he had accomplished his first goal for the day. Now, what remained was facing him once again. No matter how many times this day repeated, Incrid always ended up confronting that bastard. The one who had stabbed his neck and killed him 20 times. This time, he swore he would survive. Incrid recalled Rem's words. Since he always closed his eyes in dangerous situations, doing so on the battlefield would mean instant death. Rem had advised him to be brave, to stay composed, and to never be easily agitated or shaken. Instead, he had to become someone who knew nothing of fear, nothing of death. Like a beast. That was Heart of the Beast. Incrid pictured a creature that knew no death, then questioned himself, was he afraid of dying? No. If anything, he believed that death only made him stronger. For the first time. On his 21st attempt, Incrid dodged the enemy's stab. But it didn't last. After missing the first strike, the enemy quickly followed up with another, piercing him once more, eliminating him. Trapped in this never-ending day, he had endured pain, despair, and death. A mysterious creature urged him to give up, to step onto the boat, to accept his weakness and find peace. But Incrid refused. With fury in his eyes and a voice filled with defiance, he declared that such a day would never come. And then, he saw it. For the first time, he laid eyes on the tip of the enemy's sword. And he dodged it. One step at a time, he was moving forward. On his 22nd day, he would challenge it again. The battle raged on. This was the 33rd time Incrid had tried to overcome the wall before him. He could see it clearly now, the tip of the enemy's sword rushing toward him. He moved to dodge before it could reach him, but it wasn't enough. The enemy was still too fast. Once again, he failed to overcome the day. Once again, he died. As his body slowly collapsed to the ground, the tie of his necklace snapped. The necklace slipped from his neck, falling beside him in the dirt. During his time as a mercenary, Incrid occasionally accepted requests to subjugate monsters. It was not out of obligation but rather by chance. He would stumble upon a village in need and be asked for assistance. His decision to help stemmed from his dream of becoming a knight, as protecting the weak was a knight's duty. One day, an old man wearing a hood approached Incrid and explained that their village was poor and could only offer him a charm as compensation. In his mind, Incrid found the reward laughable, considering the risk to his life. However, the old man assured him that the charm would grant him what he most desperately prayed for. Back in the present, as Incrid lay on the ground awaiting death, he looked at the charm and wondered if it was the reason today kept repeating, forcing him to relive this moment just so he could become a knight. His enemy slowly approached, gazing down at him. "You must be in pain," the enemy murmured before raising a weapon. "Here's some mercy." Incrid stared at his opponent's face, his thoughts filled with scorn. What he was about to do was not mercy. To Incrid, this man was nothing more than a sadist who found pleasure in stabbing others. Another day began with the clanging of a pan to wake everyone up. Incrid told Rem that he had placed an insect in his boot. Annoyed by Incrid's pranks so early in the day, Rem grew irritated and questioned whether Incrid had finally lost his mind. However, Incrid simply dismissed his concerns, urging him to stop talking and come outside to teach him the heart of the beast. The training session began, and Incrid successfully evaded Rem's attacks. As they rested, Rem eyed him curiously and asked what he had been doing. How had the skin of his heart suddenly grown so much tougher? Incrid replied that he had been training. However, Rem remained unconvinced, pointing out that such progress shouldn't happen so quickly. This had already happened more than 10 times. As Rem had said, it was a sensation Incrid had learned from facing death. Rem insisted that there was no way his family's secret technique could be passed on to another person. In response, Incrid questioned why it was so important and casually suggested that perhaps he had learned it by chance. He then challenged Rem to another round of sparring, to which Rem gladly agreed. Even if Incrid had grasped the heart of the beast, he would be as good as dead if he couldn't land a strike. However, rather than attacking, he continued to evade Rem's blows. Growing impatient, Rem demanded to know how long he planned to keep dodging. At present, the only sword technique Incrid possessed was the Valen mercenary sword technique, an unorthodox style created by a mercenary known as Valen. Many spoke ill of it, dismissing it as nothing more than a petty trick. Yet, among all the techniques Incrid had at his disposal, this was the most reliable one. Incrid stepped back and prepared to attack Rem, attempting to imitate Valen's posture and the way he delivered his stabbing technique. However, Rem easily deflected the strike and knocked the sword from Incrid's hand. Determined, Incrid tried once more to replicate Valen's stab. Having died to that very attack more than 10 times, his body instinctively remembered it. Scratching his head, Rem remarked that Incrid's attack should have carried more weight. Among everything Incrid had shown him so far, that stab had been the most promising. Rem then demonstrated how the technique should be executed. With the right impact, Incrid's hand should have bled from the force. He also pointed out that Incrid was too hesitant, doubting himself too much. With a serious gaze, Incrid declared that this attack couldn't fail. But if it were blocked, he asked Rem what his next move should be. Rem smirked and told him, "Just think, I can't dodge that. And say, you're dead meat now. That way, you won't lose your grip on your sword." Although Rem's explanation was somewhat vague, Incrid understood what he meant. The difference between Incrid's stab and that bastard's stab was clear. Incrid lacked confidence in his sword. He needed to stab with the intent to kill. Step by step, he advanced. No. Even if it was just a quarter of a step, he would move forward. On the 111th day. On the 123rd day. And finally, on the 124th day. With determination in his eyes and a fierce shout, Incrid exerted all his strength to execute the sword-stabbing technique. Observing this, Rem wiped away a bead of sweat and asked if he had gone insane. Incrid's hands were worn out, blood gushing from his wounds. Yet, despite the pain, he laughed like a madman. At last, he had mastered that perverted bastard's stab. He tried it a little faster, driven by pure murderous intent. His first attempt at the stab was a failure. Yet, he did not blink, nor did he loosen his grip on his sword. Every moment flashed through his mind, the countless clashes of their blades, leading up to this very strike. As the enemy stepped on Incrid, ready to eliminate him, Incrid spoke with unwavering resolve. "Tomorrow, you're going to die." But his enemy merely smiled and replied, "The dead have no tomorrow." The day began once more with Incrid stepping on a bug that had crawled out of Rem's boots. He informed Rem that he had seen the insect scurrying inside earlier. In response, Rem thanked him. Incrid then remarked that if Rem was truly grateful, he should take over his guard duty. Hearing this, Rem couldn't help but wonder why Incrid was ordering him around so casually. It was the 125th day. Outside, Incrid called out to the big-eyed man and ordered him to bring armor, a shield, and a dagger, assuring him that he would pay for them later. The big-eyed man agreed, stating that he trusted Incrid because he was the boss. Rem then questioned whether the squad commander had always been this forceful with his commands. In response, the long-haired man sitting beside him remarked that it was because Rem constantly pushed his tasks onto Incrid. Feeling insulted, Rem shot back, asking if the long-haired man wanted to taste his axe. Moments later, the other squad members emerged from their tents, murmuring among themselves. They observed that their squad leader was behaving strangely today, noting that he was not usually this intense. Incrid felt an unbearable amount of pain each time he died. He questioned whether, after thousands of attempts, he would ever succeed. If he managed to find a way to escape and survive, would he wake up to tomorrow? Or would he still awaken to this same day? He was stronger now than he had been before, but he wondered if it was enough to be content with that. Dismissing the thought, he reminded himself that complacency was not an option. He had to surpass this obstacle and learn how to strike with precision. Determined, he resolved not to abandon this so-called blessing. No matter what, he had to keep moving forward. Incrid, a man with no special skills, managed to survive this battle through 3 key factors: preparation, luck, and a calm mind. On the 46th day, his left shoulder was shattered by a spiked mace. On the 47th day, he rolled to dodge the same weapon, only to have his head crushed by another attacker. He adapted by adding a spin to his movements, striking the enemy first. On the 71st day, a soldier struck from below, severing his foot, leaving him helpless against the stabbing maniac. On the 89th day, his head was split open when someone hurled an axe at him. Incrid realized that if he allowed this particular enemy to live, the man would interfere with his battle against the stabbing maniac. Letting him live was simply not an option. Incrid had trained extensively in throwing weapons throughout his countless repeated days, so executing the technique was effortless. However, despite all his preparation, Vel ended up right behind him. A sharpshooter known as the Claw of the Hawk approached. Incrid had no time to deal with him. His focus was on the true challenge ahead. It was time for him to face the wall. Dodging and stabbing alone would not grant him victory. He needed something more. His opponent was merely a regular soldier, yet he possessed remarkable strength, almost at the level of a prodigy. However, his lack of real combat experience made him easy to catch off guard. The Valen mercenary sword technique, with its numerous variations, proved highly effective against him. By now, Incrid had mastered every detail of the enemy's signature stab. Their blades clashed, and in an instant, the enemy's sword shattered into pieces. Meanwhile, an enemy fired an arrow toward Incrid's location. Believing he had already won, Incrid remained unaware of the projectile descending from above. Fortunately, a thrown axe intercepted the arrow midair, saving him at the last moment. At the same time, his sword finally reached the perverted bastard, delivering a lethal strike. Rem shouted that he was going to take down that Claw of the Hawk bastard, but his ally stopped him, saying it was too late and not to waste his energy. Incrid stood drenched in sweat, his breathing heavy as he slowly regained his composure. He then approached the perverted bastard, raised his sword, and with cold finality said, "This is mercy." With that, he finished him off. At last, Incrid had broken through the wall. But just then, a frog warrior hurled something at his back, knocking him to the ground. Rem spotted the attacker and immediately rushed to help Incrid. The frog warrior approached Incrid and stated that he had invested significantly in raising the perverted bastard. He could not believe that someone like Incrid had defeated him. Just as the frog warrior was about to finish off the suffering Incrid, Rem arrived and deflected his attack with his axe. The frog warrior and Rem then engaged in close combat, exchanging blows. While they were locked in battle, an enemy soldier attempted to stab Incrid. However, at the last moment, another ally arrived and swiftly eliminated the threat, ensuring Incrid's safety. Rem and the frog warrior fought on equal footing. As they put some distance between them, Rem told the frog warrior that if he intended to cut off their squad commander's head, he would need Rem's permission first. The frog warrior was surprised to learn that the weakling he had wanted to kill was actually the squad commander, not Rem. In Rem's mind, he acknowledged that his opponent belonged to a warrior race, frogs born to fight. He realized that his only options were to burn the frog warrior with magic or pierce his heart in a single strike, both of which he found troublesome. Resolving himself, Rem decided he would have to put his life on the line. However, the frog warrior deemed the battle unworthy of his efforts and turned his back on Rem to retreat. Seeing this, Rem called him a coward. Meanwhile, the other squad members continued to eliminate the remaining enemies. A red-haired man carried Incrid on his back while the others protected them. Moments later, the enemy forces began to retreat. As Incrid closed his eyes, his consciousness was transported to a different dimension. There, an unknown creature addressed him, stating that he had managed to survive for a day, but that was all. The creature went on to say that Incrid would not be able to withstand the countless obstacles that would continue to appear before him. His fate, the creature claimed, was to fall into despair and eventually give up. However, Incrid slowly stood up and declared that, to him, those obstacles existed only to be overcome. The unknown creature smiled and said that he would be eagerly waiting for the moment when Incrid's eyes, once filled with greed and ambition, were completely stripped of their light. When Incrid woke up, He was already in bed, his injuries having been treated. The place felt familiar, and a voice beside him confirmed